Alright guys, welcome back to WolfPack Cryptos and MMG Invest. In this video, I will not be doing too much charting. At the end of the video, for you guys who wanted me to cover Palladium, I will cover the price of Palladium at the end of this video. In this video, I want to talk about a few things I just want to talk about, basically. I'm going to cover economics again for the US and my biggest fears. Because nobody's talking about this, and I don't think too many people are expecting it, but I am actually starting to expect this. And this is actually, I'm just going to think out loudly, okay? And I like to put myself in the position of the Fed and, you know, the government and whatnot, and what they're going to do with this financial reset coming. So let me cover real quick a few things before I get into it. I was looking at gold stocks for searches on Google, and these are web searches, and it's actually going up slightly. And for you guys who don't know, because a few of you guys haven't known, in the past few weeks I've released my other website for MMG Invest, where you will find the research report. And I will be releasing the newsletter and then inviting you guys who've purchased already to the chat room. I'm just not sure what platform I want to use. I don't really want to use Patreon, but I might end up just using that. You can pay with cryptos, Visa, and all that. And you just go to mmginvest.com. Also, I have created on Minds.com, another platform, MMG Invest and WolfPack Cryptos. You guys could check that out. I'll post this in the chat groups. The links to the free chat group rooms are below this video. I'll post this in the newsroom and the MMG Invest chat room, which are free. Check it out. And I will also post all of the articles and everything I talk about in the newsroom and the free Telegram chat rooms. And the links are below again. Alright, so what am I worried about? What am I thinking? Well, let's just browse across some of the news off of Zero Hedge. So, I mean, the cracks are really starting to show in the fissures. The Powell, the Fed chairman, the U.S. Fed chairman, central bank Fed chairman, had another congressional hearing. And, you know, he's talking about MMT now, which is modern monetary theory, which I highlighted and I talked about in my last video, right? Which is, you guys have to listen to that. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's just another excuse to keep printing money because that's all they could do at this point. So, foreign boycott of U.S. Treasuries continues, 7-year auction indirects. So, here's the thing. Nobody's going to go to the auctions and buy the U.S. debt. And in the end, the Fed's going to just buy its own debt. It's insane. What else is going on? So, Venezuela. I would not be surprised if we go in there, and that's because of the petrodollar, right? So oil, I don't know if it's running out for the Saudis, but tensions are mounting between the Saudis and U.S., and the Saudis are talking to China and Russia. So to keep the U.S. petrodollar alive, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, you know. So watch out for that. I don't want to talk too much about this, but I'll post articles. We'll keep an eye on this. And this could, you know, if we go in there and put up an American company in there like Exxon, it could keep the dollar going for a little bit longer. Brexit. Brussels doesn't want to let go of the UK. And they're going to drag this out as long as humanly possible. And they're going to make it... I don't know what's going to happen with Brexit. We'll see. Either way, the banking sector in Europe is just... I mean, it's a zombie. They're just zombie banks. I mean, they're propped up by Mario Draghi just printing endless euros. But I see the euro falling apart before the U.S. China, I don't know. Probably the euro is going to go before Asia and the US. Tensions between Russia and the US, I mean, they're mounting. I'm not going to lie. Yeah, so Powell addressed the Senate Banking Committee. I'll take a look at that when I have some time later tonight. I just didn't have time. So, yeah, I mean, nothing's changing. Everything's just slow motion kind of unraveling globally. Just looking at the financial markets and everything. And this article, I haven't read it. I'm going to read it. And if I read it and I like it, I'll post it. But I talk about this a lot. Everything is cyclical, right? I mean, we've had the last 100 years has been the greatest expansion in human history. Well, at some point, it's going to end, and I've posted some charts. I believe I posted that in the newsletter. In the new newsletter for MMG Invest and WolfPack Cryptos, I'll throw up some big macro cyclical charts. And I've posted them in the newsrooms like weeks ago. Alright, so what's this? Stock market quiet as focus shifts to Fed cheap. So the stock market, it's not organic. Nothing's organic about it. There's no reason to be buying Amazon, Google, and all these. There's no reason to be buying Tesla. There's no reason to be buying all these stocks. The only reason is speculation on the Fed juicing the markets and stocks going higher. That's all it is, guys. It's really that simple. And you know, investors know this. And as long as the Fed keeps capitulating and is dovish, I mean, the Fed has pretty much already announced that quantitative tightening is pretty much over. And the only thing next to come will be easing again and then more QE or whatever they call it. See, Fed signals tells Wall Street that crisis is nearing. So, and then Fed's Powell predicts solid but slower growth in 2019. There's just mixed signals. The Federal Reserve won't be able to rescue investors. I mean, these are just article titles. I get it. But the Fed is worried. So they're going to just keep the easing going. So the Fed meeting minutes confirm quantitative tightening will end this year. I'll post this article as well. And the Fed has already said that there's slower growth globally and the U.S. And I've talked about that more in depth. I don't want to sound like a broken record. So America's inefficient healthcare system is driving a fiscal instability, Powell says. Which is true. And, you know, Americans, I mean, they're all obese. It's gross. It's the food and their habits. And Americans, all they do is work all day, and then they get home and they watch TV, which rots their mind, and it's, you know, propaganda, and then they eat their sorrows away. And all the food is just filled with preservatives, hormones, and poison. And people just don't have the energy or the will to work out. And that's sad, but it is what it is. Not just that, the healthcare in the U.S., it is not a free market healthcare system. It was destroyed. It started being destroyed in the 60s and 70s. And then now we have Obamacare, and I have no idea how an average American can afford healthcare. They really can't. I don't know what they're doing. But listen, I mean, people, what is it? It's crazy statistics. Like 40% of people are going to die from cancer as they age. And then the other like 40% is going to die from heart disease, which is related to like eating like shit and all the preservatives, hormones, and the fat, you know, in the food. And like you have to understand, the meat you get from your grocery store is like recycled, filled with hormones, and just grind it up, and it's mostly fat. I know they put on the percentage of fat in it, but the meat itself is just not organic. These cows, they stand there all day for generations. It's generations of cows that have been like they never move more than like 2 feet a day, and they're just being pumped, and it's disgusting. That's why I ordered the butcher box, and the link in the link below. I have a shill link you guys could use, and if you're in the U.S. you could get delivered to your house organic meat. But you have to do that. Listen, you have to do these things, and it's not cheap. But actually, the organic meat's cheaper than buying the disgusting meat from the stores, and well, the organic meat's cheaper than the organic meat at the stores, and it's actually free range and really organic. But what I'm trying to say is, what's really expensive is when you have to go to the hospital and you get cancer. If you think the food's expensive, imagine when you get sick, and you're gonna get sick eventually. So I'm not here to tell you what you want to hear. I'm here to tell you what you need to hear. So yeah, I mean, it's an epidemic. Even if the U.S. was like economically sound and the GDP was booming and all of that, the healthcare cost in the next 10 to 20 years, especially with the baby boomers aging, is still like a threatening. It's threatening the entire economy, because everyone, the baby boomers and then Generation X and whatnot, they're really unhealthy. And it's going to just cost so much. And I don't know who's going to pay for it. Is the Fed going to pay for it through money? I don't know. This is why Bernie's going to win. This is why the socialists will take over. Because everyone, they're not taking self-responsibility, even for their own health. Not just retirement, but their own health. So it's just gonna be amazing. That's why they're building all these hospitals everywhere. The only thing that I do see being built in the United States is hospitals, and that's because they're not stupid. They're preparing to profit off of millions and tens of millions of Americans just constantly getting sick and whatnot. So it is what it is. I don't want to go too much into details about that. So this is what my biggest fear is. One, the socialists are going to take control with their MMT, their modern monetary theory, their new, it's like Keynesian economics on steroids. Basically, you could just print money to infinity. And this is what they're going to do. This is what my theory is, and I could be wrong, but this is what I'm afraid of. They're going to do the modern monetary theory, and they're going to buy stocks. And that's what Japan did after their enormous real estate and commercial real estate bubble in the late 80s and early 90s. So if you guys don't know, Japan in the late 80s and early 90s had the second highest GDP in the world. They had the second strongest economy in the world next to the US. And what happened was, it was a giant bubble, just like the United States mortgage-backed security bubble. And it was insane. And it popped eventually, right? So what did the Central Bank of Japan do? The CBO, oh God, I forgot what it's the BOJ, right? The Bank of Japan, their central bank, like the Fed for the US. They did QE, they did all the money printing, but they also started buying up their own stock market, and it's insane. And what this created was the lost decades of Japan. So as you can see here in this chart, this is adjusted for inflation. Here's 1990. And then it finally popped in the early 90s. And you can see how it started tapering off their GDP growth. GDP is a measurement of your economic growth. And it's been slightly going higher, right? And that's with the world, because the world drags Japan along, especially China, nearby Japan. And it's been slightly still rising, but nothing like the rise we've seen from the 60s to the 90s. I mean, look at this rise in GDP growth. And then all of a sudden it starts tapering off. And that's because of inflation. Inflation kills economic growth in the long run. In the short term, it does create economic growth. But all of this growth right here, if you look at my mouse here, it's it's been fueled by inflation and buying stocks from their own central bank. And the Japan is basically just like the U.S. They have an aging population. They sell more diapers than for the old people than for babies. And this is going to roll over just like the U.S. But this is what I'm afraid of, what's going to happen to the United States. Because if this happens to the United States, where the Fed not only lowers interest rates to negative or zero, and then does QE 4, 5, and 6, but they also start buying stocks. And that what that does is it won't stop the stock market from crashing, but it will slow it down. It'll be like a slow motion crash. And the problem with that is, because with the slow motion crashes, people aren't gonna like, you know, they're not gonna have like a vest movement in France, right? So people are gonna tolerate it, and people are gonna lose their freedoms as the market crashes and the economy goes, and then the left is gonna take control, and they're gonna come with more welfare, okay? While the stock market and the economy is crashing in slow motion. And what that does is Americans are going to basically be like frogs in a boiling pot. So if you don't know, you could place a frog in a pot of water, well, in a pot with water in it, and then slowly boil it, and it won't do anything. It'll just sit in the pot, and it'll slowly cook and die. And that's what I'm afraid of. So if we have stagflation like Japan, and we have like the next 10 to 20 years is just a slow grind towards like second and third world, that is the worst thing that could possibly happen. Yes, it buys time. And yes, I personally will not care because my stocks will keep rising during this time. But at the same time, you're just going to lose all what's left of your freedoms. And you're just going to get everyone stuck on the dole, on the nipple, on welfare. And once you are dependent on government, you give up your freedoms and everything else, and then you are a slave. You become a slave. And if you don't, go along with the agenda, you're more likely to go along with the agenda if you're completely relying on handouts, right? So, and not just that, people are going to fall for this at first. They're going to want the handouts. But they don't realize in the next 5 to 10 years, those handouts are going to become worthless. And but, an average person does not know this. It's like a trap. So this is my worst fear. The best thing that could happen is we get a violent, horrible, horrible crash. I don't care. Mad Max for a year. Because right afterwards, we have a chance to fix everything. But if it's a slow grind and we end up like Japan with like a lost decade of no economic growth, actually the economy slowly keeps deteriorating. And the real economy, the industrial economy of the United States has been deteriorating for 40, 30 years now. So you could almost argue that we have been doing what Japan has been doing, except the Fed hasn't actually been buying stocks. What they do is they print the money and give it to the banks, and then the banks buy the stocks. So in a way, the U.S. has actually already been doing it. It's just it hasn't been in your face, and the Fed hasn't actually come in and just bought up the stock market. Now, the Fed did come in 2009 and buy up the housing market. So on their balance sheet, there's like a large percentage of homes in the U.S. that are technically owned by the Fed, which is the banks, right? All the other banks. So here's another article. I'll post this in the newsroom and the chat group, the free chat group of MMG Invest. Talks about the aftermath to avoid for the U.S. This is actually a Harvard article, and that's surprising because those Ivy League colleges are they're hardcore left at this point. They're just indoctrination camps, and it's sad because those elite kids end up running businesses in 500 Fortune companies, which will eventually go into the ground. Here's some kind of Asian article. BOJ's top 10 shareholder in 40% of Japan's listed companies. So 40% of Japan's companies are owned by their central bank. And if that isn't like basically, I don't know, the socialism, communism, fascism, then I don't know what they don't have a free market in Japan either. All right. So anyone who blames the free market once shit hits the fan is lying, or they just don't realize that we never had a free market. Not in the past like 100 years, or maybe in the, I don't know, 50s we had some, I don't know, guys, before 1913, all right? So yeah, I just wanted to get that off my shoulders. If you agree with me, or if you have your own opinion or whatever, leave it in the comment section. Let's take a look at Palladium. Alright, so Palladium, here's a monthly chart. Every candlestick represents a month, alright? So you can see, you guys need to learn time versus price if you're new. 2012's back here. Here's 2019. Alright, so Palladium has been on a tear since somewhere around February. So the beginning of 2016. Palladium has been on a tear, and I'm an idiot because I had a bunch of Palladium stocks that I heard about, that it was in a newsletter, and I forgot to buy them. I got caught up with the cryptos, and I wish I would have had at least a little bit of allocation in some of these Palladium stocks, because I would have made a killing. It is what it is, right? So you have to stay on your game and pay attention to all asset classes. So Palladium on the monthly chart is on a 7 count. So we know on a 9 count, we could expect a 1 to 4 candle pullback or worse. So, and that's just that. Listen, it's starting to go parabolic. And RSI, stock RSI is Stoch. I like to call it Stoch RSI. It's really Stoke or whatever you call it. It's overbought territory. MACD, everything, TM squeeze. It's I mean, it can still run a little more, right? So it could run possibly 2 more months higher. But you know, it is, be careful. It is starting to go into a parabolic move here. And I would set stops, a loose stop, and if you haven't bought, you can still buy in and place loose stops. This is an ETF, by the way, so I'm gonna start looking at individual Palladium stocks that may have some more upside to them. Now let's go to the weekly chart, and this is trend following, by the way. I'm starting at the larger time frame and going to the smaller. So the weekly is on a 9 sell signal. So the weekly is telling me that we might see a pullback by next week, or maybe within 2 weeks. So this is why I say I'd be careful, because look at this. I mean, Palladium's been on a tear, and it's long in the tooth. It's been running for quite some time, and it's due for a pullback sooner than later. Let's go to a daily chart. I mean, even the oscillators are extremely overbought here. Let's take a look at the daily. The daily, it's on a 7 count, so possibly 8, 9, 2 more days of upside, or any time now it might pull back. Let's take a look at the oscillators. Yeah, the oscillators are extremely overbought. So this is what I'm thinking. I'm going to wait for a nice pullback, see how far it pulls back, and then I will possibly jump back into some Palladium stocks after the pullback, after the weekly and monthly pullback. So possibly through the spring and summer, we might see a decent pullback, and that might give you another buying opportunity. The problem with Palladium is used, I know, in catalytic converters for cars. And honestly, guys, I just see that there's a car bubble in the US and Europe and China. And, you know, in the next coming years, I see car sales falling, and I just see people buying used cars. So there won't be a demand to put Palladium into catalytic converters. So, but I don't know. Listen, the last time oil took off above like $100 a barrel, and we saw inflation in the US like back in 2007, Palladium went to the moon along with gold and silver. So I'm gonna do more research into palladium and see if that might possibly happen again. It might rise with gold and silver and oil, because commodities are sort of intertwined in a way. Alright guys, if you found this video informative, thumbs up, smash that like, subscribe, share my channel. It's the only way it gets around. And leave something in the comment section, anything. And I appreciate that. And see you guys in the chat groups. Until next time.